call the meeting to order, and I'll explain to our webcast folks that we had a technical glitch on the Shaw feed, so they're now ready to go. And I'll also explain that Shaw will not be broadcasting tonight. Shaw is broadcasting from now on Tuesday nights instead of Monday nights. We've expressed our outrage, and that's the end of that.
It's always tough.
Now he'll make sure I'm out of focus the rest of the night. Mr. Clerk.
It's always tough to follow outrage. Item 1 is the minutes of the Parcel Tax Review Panel meeting held Tuesday, April 10th. The recommendations to approve those minutes.
Moved by Councillor Hodge, seconded by Councillor O'Neill. Any questions related to the work of the Parcel Tax Review Committee? Any questions at all? Very efficient. It lasted it was a quick meeting. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Item 2 is the minutes of the public hearing held Monday, April 23rd. The recommendation is to approve those minutes.
Moved by Councillor Aspenson, seconded by Councillor Sikora. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 3 is the minutes of the regular council meeting held Monday, April 23rd. Recommendation to approve those minutes.
Moved by Councillor Robinson, seconded by Councillor Reamer. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 4 is the minutes of the Maillardville Commercial and Cultural Revitalization Advisory Committee meeting of Thursday, April 5th. Recommendations to receive those minutes.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, seconded by Councillor Robinson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 5 is bylaw for final adoption. This is fourth and final reading of bylaw notice enforcement amendment bylaw related to pesticide use, number 4307. The recommendations of the council give fourth and final reading to bylaw notice enforcement amendment bylaw pesticide use 4307.
Moved by Councillor Robinson, second by Councillor Reamer. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor O'Neill is consistent. Is opposed. Okay. Oops. And Councillor Sikora. Motion carries.
Item 5 is fourth and final reading of 2012 annual tax rates bylaw 4315. The recommendations of the council give fourth and final reading to 2012 annual tax rates bylaw 4315 as amended.
Moved by Councillor Aspenson, second by Councillor Reamer. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Sikora is opposed. That motion carries.
Item 6 is approval of a development. Yes.
7.
Sorry, item 7. Item 7 is approval of development permit amendment for proposed modifications to Phase 3 of Grand Central Project at 2962 Glen Drive. The recommendation is that Council approve the signing and sealing of development permit amendment to 2962 Glen Drive, and that the Mayor and City Clerk be authorized to execute it.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Robinson, second by Councillor Reamer. Councillor Aspenson.
Well, thank you. Just some questions regarding, I think Councillor Reid brought up, like there's one stall per unit, but are you purchasing the other one, and how is that going to deal with our parking issues? Like, if it was it 1.5 or 1.25 units per unit? Because when we have one unit, you're selling the other ones, people won't pay the extra $30,000 or $40,000, and we wind with people parking on the street. So I think we really have to start dealing with that issue, and either if they're going to do that, they have to create a higher level of visitor parking to offset that. The other thing, I looked at the calculation, and they've added 50 parking spaces. What I looked through here, but they're up 82 units from the original proposal. So it's really not a one-to-one issue. So I just have concerns on those two issues about the parking. And I think we have to deal with this one unit and the sale of other units, because I think Councillor Reid pointed out earlier, most people won't buy it, and they will just be on our streets and causing some other difficulties. So those are my two concerns. Everything else, I like what they're doing, but those are my two concerns. Thank you.
Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, thank you, Worship. A couple items there raised by Councillor Aspenson. The first around the allocation of the parking, and this is something that we've kind of tripped over before, and I believe in this case, in discussions with the applicant, with the developer, what we've done with other projects is where the developer may have that additional parking stall and make it available for sale. It was pointed out, and not always do people avail themselves of that, and you have this sort of this surplus pool of parking. that technically is being provided to meet the bylaw, but people aren't purchasing the space. So one of the approaches with that is to, for the applicant, the developer, to commit to doing that for just 1 year, but then passing over those parking stalls to the strata thereafter to make it available perhaps on a monthly rental basis. Now, I have to admit, I don't know precisely in this project here if that arrangement's, excuse me, if that arrangement's been made, but that's been part of staff's approach in dealing with that allocation set off there. So that's the one piece in that.
It just concerns me, even on a monthly rate, that people...
I'll have to add Councillor Rasmussen back in. Go ahead.
Yeah, that they may be buying in it at their maximized themselves, don't have the money, and they're just going out onto the streets. So I think we need a better way of dealing with that issue rather than just putting it back to the strata. And there's just some ways I think we look at our parking strategy or moving forward, we have to look at some of these issues. I don't mind reducing due to SkyTrain coming in, the stalls and the walkability issue will reduce some need, but I still think we need to clean up some other areas in that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. Well, same issue. So I'd like to refer you to page 2, just before your tables there. It's page 2 of item 7 on the bottom. And as Councillor Asmundson said, we had 632 units from 550, which is 82 more units. I don't know how they can have a surplus parking. And it said that they have surplus, and I can't figure it out, because if you've gone 82 units and you've gone up 67 parking spots, we're still short. So with disregarding the fact that most of the units in the town center area now that are 2 bedrooms and up are selling well in excess of $300,000, more like almost up at the 4s. For young folks to afford that, there's usually two people there. And so one will take SkyTrain in 4 or 5 years from now, but right now they probably both have 2 cars. And I hear every day, I go to show apartments around here, every day I hear there's no parking. You can't park to shop. You can't park to go to a restaurant. You can't park anywhere. And as I said before, Coquitlam Center's in trouble now. They're going all over. And then the other thing, I showed one on Heffley the other day, and the realtor assured me I didn't have to worry about 2 cars because the library was going in and there'd be lots of parking there. And I said, oh, really? And he says, yeah, I can show you. It's right down here. And he looked out the window and pointed to the parking spot for the library. And I says, oh, isn't that nice? And I said, you expect, oh, yeah, everybody will be parking there. I said, oh, that's good to know. And then I handed him my card. I mean, it was just bizarre. So this is a huge problem. This is a massive problem. And we're coming up to some other things tonight on this agenda. Parking is a huge issue here. And when you're talking the commercial, we're trying to get a mix of commercial and retail in the town center. So let's say we start getting let's say some gyms that are going to be open till 11 or 12 at night, which will be a logical thing for folks to put in there, coffee shops or little bistros or stuff like that. When the folks that are selling these units are telling me, when I'm showing them, that, oh, don't worry, after 5 o'clock there's lots of places to park because this is commercial. Well, they can't be doing that. Then we have no parking for the commercial tenants who are paying top dollar to be there in that commercial area. And yes, I understand that this is SkyTrain, and no, I am not stupid. And 5-10 years from now, maybe there will be enough business in the downtown core for walkability for everything. Right now, there isn't. So I have asked you before, and I'm going to ask again, that the one parking site that we do have down there, I would like to get developers to start contributing to that when they're short of parking to build it. So if we tear it down in 10 years and build something else, great. But at least for this interim period, we could provide parking. We have to do something. I feel we have a responsibility to these folks to do something. And even if we have to do it with some kind of a City of Coquitlam residence pass, and they can only park on that place if they have a residence parking, I mean, ONI could give out ONI passes, Polygon could give out Polygon passes. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to do this, but it's giving the folks a place to park until SkyTrain actually gets here. It loosens up street parking for the vendors and the little retail stores that you're trying to get in there. What we're doing now is just not it's just not acceptable. So you're going to have to show this to me that they've gone up 82 units. I want to know if they've got now 1 unit per parking.
There's two issues with respect to this particular development. There is the development-specific issues, which Jim McIntyre will address in terms of those issues. But I think it would be appropriate to hear a bit of an update from Mr. Suzak, whose staff are doing an overall parking study and will be reporting out shortly on some of the issues that have been highlighted. So perhaps we could start with Bill and then go to the specifics with Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. This particular application drives home the issue of the need for parking strategies, and Councillor Reid just mentioned essentially cash in lieu. That's one kind of strategy. Engineering staff are working on 2 parking reports. We expect to have them ready. We're hoping about middle of June. We want to make sure that they are coordinated with other policy work like the transit-oriented design strategy, where we're looking at the entire line. We want to make sure that what we're going to recommend works for those cases as well. 2 sides to the parking that we're looking at is essentially strategy and policy, part of which may well be cash in lieu. We are actively looking at that and how can that work. The other part of parking is on-street, and we still need to come back and flesh out some on-street issues for parking with council as well. Like I said, those are proceeding in parallel. We expect to have them done about the middle of next month.
Well, I hope they're practical, because I don't want to be accepting parking studies from all the developers going into this very concentrated area, and they're saying, oh yeah, we can do this, this, and this. You know, I mean, sure, it looks good on paper, but you have to be practical. And I would suggest all of you take a drive around this town centre about 10 o'clock tonight and see if you could park anything. And that's before we get hardly any building done. We have no street parking left. I'm done.
Thank you. Councillor Hodge.
Okay, Councillor Reid raised a number of the concerns that I have, and you know, and I look at this development over its history, and today, based on the original bylaw for this, or I guess the amended bylaw, is that they should have a total of 957 spots. But using the variance, and I guess previous councils has now acknowledged that you can apply for up to a 30% variance. Well, you know, I suspect that every developer is going to apply and has been applying for a variance. So using the variance, we come down to 682 spots. But I guess for some reason they've decide they can fit more in or they need more, so we're up to 792. And to me, that's not a surplus of 97 parking spots. That's still a shortage of about 178 parking spots from what they should be putting in. And so, you know, I'm concerned in this area. I mean, you know, this development is right across from, well, kitty corner to Glen Pine here, and we've already hearing from the residents and the people who use Glen Pine about how bad the parking is at Glen Pine. To me, the worst place to find parking commercially is along High Street, which is right around the corner. And the other place that's really bad to find parking is along Glen, across from what I call the government building, where the federal government has their offices in there. These are bad places to park already. And I think that this is just compounding as we continue to allow developers to come in, and each one gets a variance based on the fact that SkyTrain is going to be coming into this area. And I would argue that, you know, that SkyTrain is going to be a wonderful way for people, maybe both people live in the apartments, to get to Vancouver. But once they come back to Coquitlam, this is Coquitlam. This isn't downtown Vancouver, where there's a bus coming down Broadway every 5 minutes going both directions, and that you can get to where you want to get to. People are going to have cars. Even if they don't use them to get to work, they're going to have cars to get to the playing fields, to get around to the different things around Coquitlam. So I'm really concerned about this ongoing issue of parking being reduced. And I'm glad to hear that there's some talk about possibly a cash in lieu, because to me, when we look at parking, covered parking having a value of $25,000 to $40,000 per stall, and we're reducing these numbers, and I'm afraid that in 6 or 7 years we're suddenly going to wake up and say, geez, we need parking somewhere here, and then we don't have the money to build those spots. And it may be that at some point we are going to have to look at tiered parking, because I think the surface lots in the town center area are going to be too valuable for surface parking, and the only way to do it is just going to be to stack, and where's the money going to come from? And we know the need is going to be generated by these variances. So I guess my question to staff is I think it's been partially answered, is there a way that we can treat this like we do with parkland, that if a park's not needed in a specific neighborhood, the developer puts up some money in lieu of that park, the money's pooled together, and then a park is bought where it's needed. And just because the parking isn't needed in this one particular building, it may be needed somewhere else in this area. And I'm just wondering to staff, is this something that we can approach? Is it something that can be done through the parking strategy?
Mr. Sure, Your Worship, that's exactly it. That is the general idea, that if it's identified that a parking shortage is likely to arise, one of the policy levers that the council could use is asking for some portion of the lost parking to be paid for, and that's a strategy that we're looking at, and we intend to bring it forward as part of the parking strategy piece that we're working on.
So currently,
how it relates to this particular, right. I can't really comment, because this is something that has been in the works for quite a number of years. But moving forward, we're going to be hopefully avoiding this.
Yeah, and I appreciate that this developer went through the process, applied for the variance, that was granted. I don't know in past when these variances are granted, there is nothing given in compensation. It's just you request a variance, so you're given a variance. Maybe they throw in some parking passes or something, or transit passes. But essentially, up until now, the history has been that variants are just granted based on need, but there's no allotment put aside for future needs in case things go awry in the future. Is that correct?
Well, Your Worship, there is no cash in lieu policy at this time. Now, whether or not developers have, on an individual application basis, made contributions, I'm not entirely sure. That would be application by application.
Case by case. Okay.
Okay. My own comments. I added myself to the list. There were comments we don't want. In fact, Councillor Hodge mentioned this is a shortage of parking. There is a risk, I think, that we give thought to the original parking requirements without transit as being the appropriate, and I don't think Council believes that those are the appropriate parking requirements, the ones that were pre-variance, pre-transit. We believe, as a council, we ought to believe that transit will attract people out of their cars, and that it will result in the need for fewer cars. We don't know what that number is, whether the number is 30% or 15%. This actually is an improvement on what variations we've already given this particular site. We ended up with more parking. I think the real risk, though, is that we could think that an empty parking space is a valuable thing, and in the end, I want us to have the absolute minimum amount of parking in some of these buildings as we possibly can, because the societal cost of that parking space is enormous. So therefore, I would support entirely, and I have supported up till now, the concept of a parking reserve fund that allows us then to accept contributions from the development industry where we do relax their parking requirements, such that we'll have the capacity to go in and strategically install parking in a neighborhood where the numbers aren't right. I also have a lot of faith, though, in our staff in trying to calculate the appropriate number here, and in making the staff recommendation. I'm going to support the staff recommendation here because I think it's. I think that's what we have to do. Parking is a science. There's an art to it, no question. But we've got to make sure that we balance that need. And in the end, unless you've got one parking space per unit or 2 parking spaces per unit, unless the parking ratio is 1.0 or 2.0, you're going to have to find a way of divvying the spare parking up, because people don't get 2/3 or 1/3 of a parking space for their unit. And there's no reason in the world why you'd say everyone that has 3 kids, everyone that has a 3-bedroom, automatically must have 2 cars, because that doesn't work either. So I don't have a problem with the idea of selling the parking spaces. We need a regulatory framework that allows that our retail merchants will have the parking available to them that is intended for them. That's where we ought to go. It isn't in requiring a whole bunch more parking space in buildings, and it isn't in trying to force the development industry to to link a particular parking space to a particular unit if that person needs 3 bedrooms but doesn't need 2 cars. So. Councillor Robinson's next.
Thank you. I'm not one who supports lots of parking in buildings. I know that Councillor Reid and I often debate this one but I also appreciate that rapid transit is new to us, and so we don't quite know what to expect, and so want to be prepared for the worst case scenario. I appreciate Councillor Hodges' comments, though. I really hadn't thought about it so much that way around the what I'll call the suburban parts of Coquitlam, where we don't have good transit. We will never have good transit. I've really come to that realization. We're not likely to have that. And so we will bring cars down into our city centre and to bring our business to the retailers. And so for me, the issue is, as the mayor pointed out, is not so much making sure that there's all that parking, as 2 parking stalls per unit, but that we make sure we get a really good parking management strategy properly developed that supports the retailers. That's really the key, because I think Councillor Reid is right, that's where people will park. They're not going to buy the extra parking stall if they don't have to. I wouldn't. But if they know, and this is where those lovely parking meters come in, because if it is metered till 10 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock at night, you're not going to park there when you come home from work, because it's just not going to be feasible. You're going to have to 2-hour time limit or whatever. You're going to have to move, and so that's not going to work. At the same time, I think what we're going to start seeing is that with rapid transit, people are going to go back to being 1-car families. I grew up as a 1-car family. It wasn't what you did. Mom walked to the grocery store and made her order, and then it got delivered because you had strollers and kids to walk home. And I think we're going to see more of that, going back to that when people are living more urbanly. And so they won't want to have, they won't want it, they're going to have to buy that extra parking stall even if they don't need it. And that's not good for the consumer either. So finding that right balance is the challenge for us. I'm going to support this, but I think I will rest easier, and I think rest of council will rest easier once we see that parking management program come forward so that we know exactly what we're dealing with. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor O'Neill.
Yes. Just wanted to make sure that my math is correct here, or roughly I'm looking at the right things. In the original development permit, it called for 745 parking spaces, which represented a surplus of 33 spaces. And what we're looking to approve today, it's 779 spaces, which represent a surplus of 97 spaces. Now, my math tells me that the surplus we have with this plan is 12.4%. The surplus we had with the plan that had already been approved was 4.4%. That's sizably more. That's one of the main reasons that I'm going to say I'm going to support this, because we are actually increasing the surplus from 4.4% above the minimum to 12.4%, according to my math. Does that sound right?
I think you better with words.
There are more parking spaces per unit, yes.
Yes.
Mr. McIntyre.
I made the percentages up here.
Okay,
I did some mathematics here.
Mr. McIntyre.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, I haven't got my calculator out, so I can't verify those percentages, but they're trending, they're going in the right direction, because, and I'm also very sorry, I should have read this report more closely, the use of the term surplus 33 spaces is kind of misleading. What's basically happening here, attachment A is an original development permit, the next page over is under the current zoning bylaw provision. So you have all these columns, and if you add up all the number of different size units in each of the phases, a certain number of 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedroom, and our zoning bylaw is set that depending on the unit size, that'll generate a certain number of parking stalls. So if under the bylaw back when this thing was first approved, like in 2007, the total parking required for all those units, all the visitor space, and all the commercial would have been 993. That's the column. That's the number at the bottom of that column there. In those days, the official community plan, the city center area plan, provided for 30%, up to 30% parking variance in city centers. So the council would consider those up to 30%. It didn't lock the city into pre-approving that, but that it gave that sort of framework. So under that, the variance that was approved, ultimately it would lead to a total of 712 parking stalls being provided. And that's the second number, the number at the bottom of that second column there. Now, what the developer has done through the previous phases, they've actually provided more parking than the variance allowed for. And typically that's around to make sure there's enough visitor and commercial space. So that's where you have this this parking space provided number. That's the 745, and the difference between those two is the surplus. So it's still less than what the bylaw requirement would have been, 993, but it's over what had been approved by the variance before. So it's a little confusing, the terminology, and I apologize for that. So since then, since 2007, the city's zoning bylaw it's been updated and improved and streamlined over time. And what that means is that actually going by the bylaw nowadays for the project of this size, and yes, they've changed the number of units, but they've there's less larger units and more smaller units. So in the end, it becomes a little bit of a wash around the parking provided. Under our current bylaw, the total parking stalls for residential, visitor and commercial would be the 957. What would be provided for by the variance and what they're actually providing for is that total 779. So I think Councillor Neal is correct in that the difference is between what the bylaw calls for what's being provided is a lesser percentage now than it was originally.
Just because of that explanation, I just recalculated, and what we're looking at then is the surplus of 33 spaces over the required parking spaces with the variance in attachment A. That would have been that's the bare minimum, that's the minimum requirement. So it's 33 spaces over 712. That's a 4.6% surplus. And then in our new attachment, under what we're looking at now, we have a surplus of 97 over a bare minimum of 682, and that's a 14.2% surplus. So that's a sizable increase in what they are providing over what they were allowed to actually go for. Correct? Okay, good. So,
yeah, they used to take almost all of the variance we were anticipating allowing them. Now they take about half of it. Under the new plan, the building requires less parking than it used to, and the developer has provided more parking than they used to. As a result, some would say this is a better plan. I would argue it's actually got too much parking.
there we go.
Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not sure whether maybe some of our developers or some of our planning people should seek employment with the Federal Minister of Finance. And a reduced deficit somehow becomes a surplus. However,
what percentage reduction was that?
That's right. I don't do percents, Your Worship. And what I've been looking at as everyone's talking about parking, and I just can't find an answer to parking. It's going to be a problem forever. I believe that we need to reduce the numbers of cars on the road. I think transit will give us some ability to minimize the number of cars on the road, but I can tell you that for 8 or 9 years I rode the West Coast Express downtown every day and rode it back every day, and that whole time my wife and I had 2 cars. It didn't, because I've gotten home to Coquitlam, and if I needed to go somewhere other than downtown on West Coast Express in the morning, car was the only way for me to do it. There was no, transit was bike, yes. Well, if I'd started much, much earlier in my life, that might have been a good idea. And I know there are electric ones, and I may take a look at that. So I'm looking instead of the number of parking stalls. I'm looking at the number of units, and there's obviously a significant change in the developer's expectation of what the market is, of who will buy. So we've gone from, in looking at phase 3 only, we now want to build 186 one-bedroom units. Previously, there were going to be 31. What the market will take up in town center high-rise living apparently is quite different from what was expected at the beginning of this. But I have to respect the developer's information. He's marketed the previous 2 towers, 2 phases, and he's found out what the market is. This is the best information that he can get, and it's in all our interests for him to have a successful development. People move in, people live here, pay property taxes, participate in the life of the community. So I'm going to support it. I think it's a risk, but we're moving in the direction of everything that we've said we wanted. More density, less automobiles. It's a challenge. The developer thinks it'll work. I don't know that anybody knows better than the developer what will work on a particular site, particularly when they're not coming in blind. They've done a bunch of other work in the neighborhood. They know what people want to buy. As of a couple of months ago. By the time the tower's out of the ground, who knows? It's the best information that we have, and I'll support it. Thank you.
Thank you. And perhaps in about 5 years, we'll all switch to 2.5 meter long cars, and the parking problem will go away. Seeing no other questions, all in favor? Opposed? Councillor Reid is opposed. The motion carries.
The next item, item 8, is consideration of fourth and final reading of zoning amendment bylaw 4288. This is an authorization for the issuance of a development permit at 614, 618, and 622 Coma Lake Avenue. The recommendations that council give fourth and final reading to City of Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw 4288, and also to approve the signing and sealing of the development permit at this address, and that the mayor and city clerk be authorized to execute it.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, second by Councillor Asmundson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 9 is a preliminary report on an application to amend the Windsor Gate Development Agreement. This is for 3096 Windsor Gate. Prior to reading out the recommendation, I just note that at recommendation of staff is to change this, that council refer an application to amend the Windsor Gate Development Agreement to a public meeting and not a public hearing.
So moved. Second.
Actually, it hasn't been moved. Sorry, we're moving the amended staff report then, and its recommendation.
Yes. So the wording would be, Councillor Sikora's moved.
Staff have edited the staff report to read public meeting.
Yes.
And Councillor Sikora just moved the recommendation, seconded by Councillor Reid? Yeah. Okay. Councillor Reamer.
Thank you. So what would be the difference between public meeting, public hearing?
Sure. Essentially, a public hearing is a defined statutory process generally related to rezoning of land. What's being proposed here is different. It's a modification of an existing agreement that was agreed to and approved by a council resolution. The land here in question is already zoned, and none of the proposed changes would require rezoning.
Right.
So even though a public hearing is not required by legislation, the city feels it's important for residents, particularly those in the area, to be able to have their say and comment on the proposed changes. We're going to follow all of the same notification requirements in terms of letters, ads, and signs. and the public meeting will take place immediately following the regularly scheduled public hearing, so the same night. It's just not operating under the envelope of a public hearing as defined in legislation.
Okay, one of my concerns is, and I would have liked to have read in the report that the meetings that Polygon has held were more positive than negative, however we didn't. My concern is for those people who are not yet living in that particular development. So you may have investors who have purchased, or you may have people who have purchased who have simply not moved in. How can we cover them as well for purposes of this public meeting?
Well, there's always challenges with where residents are at the time of the hearing, but we send addresses to both occupants and owners. So when we do a public hearing, we...
Okay, so you will have the addresses for those owners that are not living there.
The same place that the tax notices would go to, for example.
Okay.
And we also address ones to occupants where we know that there are two different addresses at play.
Okay.
There'll be signs on the property and there'll be ads in the paper as well.
Right. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
And just to be clear, we're currently debating the motion, not just the question of the word meeting. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I'm not debating again, but I want to compliment this developer on one of the parking solutions he's come up with, the incorporation of 60 stalls in a tandem arrangements for units with 2 or 3 bedrooms. Now, here's somebody that's actually making common sense. Yay. They're not recognized or counted by the bylaw, and yet this developer is allowing this extra space, which makes total, absolute sense. And something that Councillor Asmundson brought up, that unsold parking spaces will become the ownership of the strata after 1 year, that isn't always the case. Sometimes the actual builders hold on to them and use them as a money venture down the road somewhere, so it doesn't always happen. And I think we're going to have a meeting on one of our workshop days and just go over all these things on how everything is owned or not owned, or owned by the strata or held onto by the developer for other things. But we have to go to our public meeting, and I know we're going to hear lots on this, but here comes a developer that actually says to planning, you know, there are some solutions here. And my big solution is still at the corner of Lincoln and Westwood, on the parking lot that 30 years ago Sikora bought, saying that that's where he was going to put a parking lot if SkyTrain ever came. Well, we're 30 years too late, but we've got the ground floor there, and if we had enough developers come along with amenities and built that, and we could give them ownership of a floor or a portion of it for a period of time, we could get ourselves a parking garage built. We could alleviate some of the problems for the developers and alleviate some of the problems we're going to have over the next 4 or 5 years while construction's done. I'm done. Thank you. You won't hear me talk about parking again.
Could staff please make a note of the last comment? Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, I'll take my car out of the garage on this one and not park it. Just a couple of general comments, because I'm in favor of sending this to a public hearing, because I think it's extremely important that we hear from the people here. This is, to my mind, in my eye, a very good proposal. There's some excellent sketches and computer-generated graphics here showing how, even though density is increasing, the whole feel of the development will seem to be will be more open and more green. At the same time, though, I'm very aware that the existing owners there bought on a very specific understanding of exactly what this development would look like, and that this was part of the marketing tool, I imagine, and one would think that there are some people who, indeed, we know from the report and the reaction that Polygon has shared with our staff, that there are some people opposed to this, and I can understand that they would feel that the goalposts have been moved, that they bought on an understanding that it would be one thing, and now you're turning it into another, or attempting to turn it into another. it reminds me a little bit of the controversy that took place a year or two ago about the Westwood Plateau Golf Course. Everybody up surrounding the golf course bought on the understanding that golf course was going to be there forever and forever green, and they had a feeling, for better or for worse, justified or not, that somebody was trying to move the goalposts on them here, trying to change things, so I treat that sort of concern quite seriously, and I'll be very interested in knowing what the public thinks, and I would encourage all the owners there, existing owners, to come out to that public meeting. I also want to know if, in an instance like this, whether there's, because it's not bound by the strict rules of the public hearing, whether there's actually any possibility for us to be more proactive in how we find out exactly what the people current owners in that development think, without sitting here and waiting for them to show up, 10 or 15 of them, maybe only the angriest, maybe only the happiest. Can we perhaps have a hire Ipsos Reid to do a specific poll of all the existing owners in there, or a representative sample? Is that within our bailiwick to be able to do that? I'd be very interested in something like that, so we know specifically what we'll have quite a good grasp then of exactly what the opinion is, as opposed to the public meeting, which might not be really representative. I don't know who can answer that question for me. But that is a question. Maybe, Mr. Mayor, do you know if that's a possibility, that we can actually go out and specifically canvass people?
I think it is possible that Mr. McIntyre knows the answer to that.
It's a very interesting suggestion, Your Worship, and certainly, as the City Clerk has pointed out, since it's not a public hearing that we're holding, we're not bound by the same statutory notification and procedure. So, as with many things, at Council's decision and direction, staff will follow that direction. I know the city uses Ipsos Reid once a year. We have sort of a standard community survey we do, just to sort of gauge on where the community's at overall. This would be the first time, to my knowledge, where we've gone and looked at a specific project around a specific development to canvass people. So it's new. It's something different. So I guess staff would take council's direction on that. It may set a precedent, though, that we may be called on to pursue again. So I would be a little careful venturing into that territory.
Well, I also think it raises the question as to what our role here is. Our role isn't arbiters of a decision that can be made by the residents of that development. Rather, our role is to guide good public policy. And I actually I think this is arguably a better project. So I might think that, and I think there are a great many residents that may feel that this is a nicer project now. I note that roughly 10% of the residents have come out to these meetings, and of those, you're likely to see those who are more opposed, granted, and the majority of those were more opposed. But I don't know. You know, I'm interested in hearing anecdotally, perhaps at the podium, why they might be opposed or what their concerns were, because I think some of those concerns might be founded on information that has changed or whatever. So I don't know if you'd get that kind of result out of a
okay. Well, I'll not put forward a formal motion, but I'll sort of hold that in the back, hold that in abeyance.
Yeah.
I'll park the idea for a while, perhaps, until after the public meeting. Then, and if I feel that I still need to know more, I might say, you know what, before we make the decision, because I don't think this is really representative or something is, then I might put it forward again as a motion to look into. But I will take my key out of the ignition on that one right now.
Well, it might be an expansion of our bailiwick, whatever that is. Councillor Asmundson.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to have the meeting for the public come out, but I think people have to realize that this is more than just the residents of Windsor Gate. This is the New Horizons, people that all live within that area that this plan was made and people agreed to that live in and outside of Windsor Gate. Having said that, I think, we've seen just now a presentation on development. While it's not built yet, some refinements and opening up that's making it better. And we've seen sometimes where we had Liberty Homes had a plan where it was supposed to be for town housing. They came up with a novel idea there were some people against it, but when you look at that development now, the opening up the better view corridors. So I think when people look at this proposal coming forward, let's have an open mind on how they view this process. But I think it's very important to have all the people come, have their say from the whole area around there. Because this was an agreement between the city and this developer on the numbers of densities. And I think the whole, just not the Windsor Gate, but the people living around that area have to see what the benefits are. And that's up to the developer to explain what those benefits are for everybody in that area. I guess I'll go back to my comment I made earlier today to the developer. This does go through, and you're looking at some high-rises rather than massing of low-rise buildings. Once again, I'd like to see a more iconic, unique type of looking buildings. Now, I put the comment to Mr. McIntyre in the planning department about, we talk about pro forma cost of Coquitlam compared to Vancouver not getting maybe as an iconic or shaped buildings. But I looked at the building being up for sale right now in Surrey called The Wave, and you look at that building and the uniqueness of it, and you're saying that the land costs in Surrey and Coquitlam are the same. So I guess my thing from council in here, I want to push out, and hopefully council would support that. The skyline in a city is the unique aspect to a city. It marks your city. It gives it that character, that distinction. And I want to push out to the developers, whether it's this one, the ones that were here today, to come in here with a greater creativity in the buildings they're putting up, more iconic look. I've been to cities around the world, and you will look at the very unique, iconic-looking high-rises as a statement to that city, a statement of uniqueness to that area. And I want that challenge, and I want our council maybe to start pushing our development industry friends to be more creative in the look of the buildings that they're putting up. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd support this, I guess, just for so that I'm absolutely clear. Aside from the fact that we're calling it a public meeting, we're doing everything that we would do in a public hearing in terms of notice and all that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
And it seems to me that we are already going beyond what's required of us. I think it's appropriate that we do that. But I don't see a need to go beyond it, to treat this as something greater. Make sure as best we can that everybody possible has the opportunity to come and speak, just as they would if we were amending the OCP or changing a piece of zoning or any of those kinds of things. These are significant changes, and people should have the opportunity to speak about them. But at the same time, I think we have to recognize that the developer has already done consultation. He's not blindsiding the people who are already there. I've talked to people in that area who are aware of what's contemplated, and some of them speak favorably about it and some of them not quite so much, but they're all appreciative of the fact that they're knowledgeable. So I look forward to hearing what people have to say at the public meeting and to our deliberations following that, having heard what people have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Reid.
Well, I just wanted to reply, Your Worship, to Councillor O'Neill. Usually every year when we do an Ipsos read, we get people phoning us or writing us and saying, well, I didn't understand the question. Well, that's not what I really meant. Or what do you mean, is it good, is it great, or is it poor? Or, you know, it's really how the question is posed to them. And I don't think that's our responsibility. I think that's the developer's responsibility to get all the folks out, and I think they do a great job. They've had a lot of public meetings with this. And the other thing, I've looked at this quite carefully, and the one thing it does, it's tucked into a little corner of our city, and every so often you get developments that are just going to be the place to live, and I think this is one of them. And one of the things it's going to do by moving all the low rises to high rises, I believe, is give more open and ground space, and it's going to give the idea that you're in a more spacious open area, and we're quite close to SkyTrain. So I think the folks that live there, though, they were promised something, and they have to come back and look again. But to go to Ipsos Reid or something, I just don't think I'd be comfortable doing that. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. And Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I just want to reflect on the changes that are being proposed here and note the in relation to the presentation we had from Beatty at Fraser Mills, and there's a consistent theme in urban planning and design that I'm seeing that suggests, I mean, there's some similarities in terms of the massing and actually going with a smaller footprint, a little more height, and more green space. And I think that that's a better overall urban design. And so I look forward to seeing more specifics and hearing from the public. I think, and what I appreciated about this early afternoon's presentation was the pictures really did a great job of capturing that when they did sort of the before and after and taking a look at where the open spaces were and what's the public realm. And so I would encourage this developer to maybe take a look at some of those drawings, because it really did a really nice job of helping people or certainly helping me understand what the changes were and how the feel of the space once it's all built out might feel different, and why this new design that Beatty's proposing is a better design. And I think it's very similar to what's being proposed here, and it was very valuable. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Reamer.
Thank you. I, too, just wanted to speak to Councillor O'Neill's suggestion about using Ipsos Reid. He had mentioned this to me earlier today, but I've since had time to put some thought to it. I think it's really important when people give us their feedback that they have received accurate information and a good presentation. And I think if we were to send Ipsos Reid out there to do a survey, that they would not be receiving that adequate information and that adequate presentation, which they already have by those who have attended Polygon's sessions, and will do in our public meeting as well. Staff, I'm sure, will do a presentation, and perhaps Polygon as well. So I would not support going to Ipsos Reid for that reason. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually didn't comment at all on the proposal, but Councillor Robinson reminds me that this project originally was designed with the promise of SkyTrain sometime in the future, perhaps. And now SkyTrain is going to be built, and the proponent undoubtedly sees how hard we're pushing as a council to add a station, if possible, which would be a couple of blocks from this project. So I would have been surprised to not see some adjustment and some look at how we can make better use of this site, or perhaps make it more transit-oriented. And Councillor Robinson's points related to the consistency between the design elements at Fraser Mills, which we saw this morning and this afternoon, and the design elements that we're seeing here being proposed, suggest that this is the leading edge of how things perhaps will go in the future as we look to try to find more green space at grade, and more and less building at grade, and more public realm. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the public says, because this will be a public meeting, not just a meeting of the residents as well, and see whether we can look to the developer for great things again. Okay. The motion on the floor is it was moved. Referring it to a public meeting. And that's the adjusted last word of the recommendation. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 10 is the 2012 Municipal Police Unit Agreement. The recommendation is that Council approve the 2012 Municipal Police Unit Agreement as found in Attachment A of the report of the Deputy City Manager.
Moved by Councillor Asmussen, seconded by Councillor Reamer. Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, thank you very much. You know, I went through this thing again, and the one problem that I really have is these pay raises that are addressing from this year to 2016. And I wish I had a crystal ball to somehow be able to say, yeah, 3.7% increase in salary for the RCMP in 2016 is a good thing. I remember when I was in Ottawa, and the fact is the RCMP had a frozen salary for about 8 to 10 years. And I was the guy that had it unfrozen and got him the raise, because we could not get the RCMP in training those days because nobody wanted to really apply. but we had some problems. So I went to the Prime Minister, and certainly we adjusted the pay raises for the RCMP. I believe that it was deserved then, and I believe that, just like, in 2012, 0.7. It's a small raise. It's a very, very small raise. Okay? 2013, 1.2. And then it started to escalate to 3.7. And that's a thing that I really got a big hiccup with. I believe that they should be paid, that they should be well paid, but I do not for 1 minute, because 2016 we could have a very, very hard recession. We could. I don't have a crystal ball to say that they won't or that they will. So I cannot foresee ourselves voting for something that's 5 years down the road. It's just, to me, I got a problem with that. So I will not be supporting it. And I think also it's maybe a high time that we had a study of our own city police force. Port Moody's got it. I know it costs more money, but Port Moody seems to be very, very happy. I'm not saying that the RCMP are not doing a good job, but the RCMP are federal police. They're really mainly paying attention to E Division and Ottawa. They're not really localized police force, a city police force. So I think that, I think it's high time that maybe we did have a study to have our own city police force. So that's another thing that I don't think they will be signing up for. I know we can give them a 2 years notice and we can be out of it. But I think that's something that we should take on a study on it and see where we come in, and maybe even have a referendum, as far as the police forces are concerned. But 5 years down the road, for me to vote for a raise of 2016 to 3.7, I cannot support it. I cannot support even, I think I can support maybe this year, next year, but beyond that, I don't have a crystal ball. They'll tell me what the police force should get paid, or what it's fair or it's not unfair, whatever it may be. So I will not be supporting it for that reason.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. Well, Councillor Sikora has a problem with 5 years. I have a problem with a 20-year term, because that's what we're being asked to sign on for, not so much around the fees, the salaries, but more around that we're signing on to another 20-year commitment. And I've been doing also a bit of research and connecting in with some other municipalities and asking what some of their concerns are. And there's a whole list of concerns from a range of some of our colleagues in other municipalities. The one that I'm stuck with is the review process, and that really we have no say, that there's a so-called review process where we have an observer from the province who will be able to watch the proceedings of a review process, and that there's really no input. And it reminds me of a debate that we've had around this table and around the Metro table around the RGS. And we fought hard on that one. And this feels similar in that respect, that we are not having an opportunity to reflect back around whether or not this is good for us. And so I'm not happy with this. The other concern I have, and certainly not clear in this contract, has to do with Green Timbers and the new building that's going in Surrey. And it's not really clear who's paying for that. I don't understand, based on this contract, because right now there's E-Division is in Vancouver, it's going to Surrey, the costs aren't that clear. I know that colleagues in Burnaby, Richmond, Port Coquitlam, and one of the North Vans, I don't remember which one, also have those concerns, as well as the integrated teams, that there's not a whole lot of clarity. There is for IHIT, but not the other integrated teams. So I would prefer that we have some time to get some of these questions answered. I know that there are some others who are working really hard to get these questions on the table, and would rather take our time and get our questions answered rather than sign off and then say, oh, but what about this, but what about that? We held out with the RGS. We were really clear. I think that was a hard-fought battle, but I think we made some really good points in terms of how important it is to have all the information before you sign on the dotted line. And I don't know that that we're ready to sign. I'm not ready to sign on the dotted line, so I won't be supporting it at this time. I'd rather get some more answers. Thank you.
Okay, and the intent at this point is there's two choices. One is we can, if we wanted to have a vote to endorse the staff recommendation, or we can set aside more time, and I don't know that there's any drop-dead date at this point. Let's face it, June 1st, the RCMP will still be in the building next door, and they won't be packing boxes. They'll continue to work for us until, I see the superintendent said no, he has no intention to move, short term anyway. Mr. Dumont has.
Yeah, just quickly on those points raised. It is a 20-year agreement, but really we're bound for 24 months. There's a 24-month opt-out provision. In terms of the review process, it is I guess something that we don't have a lot of input in, but we're not an order of government, so we're really not a party to. It's the federal government contracting with the province, and then the province giving us an agreement that mirrors the one that they have with the federal government. So for our agreement to change, their agreement with the federal government has to change, and that's where the process is in terms of reviewing and altering the agreement. So it's a three-way thing, and we're kind of bound to what happens between the senior governments. And basically, the provisions for us to do policing are all granted to us by a senior government. So
I appreciate that, but I also have learned in my short time in this business that if you don't stick to your guns and push some of these things and say this is still not acceptable, then things will continue to carry on. So what I'm saying is that this is not acceptable. This is not an acceptable review process. I may get stuck with it, but I want it on record that this isn't good enough, and I expect the province to negotiate better on our behalf. They didn't do as good a job as I think they ought to have, but unless I make a real clear point that it's not good enough, it will never change. So I think it's a good thing. Even if we get stuck with it, I get it, but I think we need to stand up and be counted.
Thank you. If I could just continue on a couple more points. With respect to green timbers, there are cost estimates of those costs that will come online down the road, but it's not completed at this point, so it is just estimates at this point. And in the time frame that we're being asked to sign this, whether we delay a month or 3 months or 6 months, we're not going to know exactly what those costs are. And finally, with the integrated teams, that's a issue that's specific to the Lower Mainland. The Municipal Police Unit Agreement is basically a cookie cutter for the whole province, as well as for 9 provinces and territories across the country. So it's the same agreement basically across the country, and they don't address those types of local issues in any of those agreements, because it would just become impractical for them to be doing individual agreements by specific area or municipality across the country. So I just wanted to clarify some of those.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, I'll leave that for a second. Councillor Reamer.
Thank you very much. Well, I am going to support this. The increased costs that we're seeing, I'm very happy that staff budgeted for those and saw those coming. The costs going till 2016 will escalate as time goes along. And I do see that as a form of downloading, I suppose, from the federal government. And we're asked to do more, again, with less. But this agreement does provide increased transparency and accountability for our municipal governments. And I am going to support it for that particular reason. I do understand that this is agreement between our senior levels of government, and I'm not sure what the impact is if a bunch of municipal governments choose to vote against this. Mr. Dumont, do you have any clarification on that?
Thank you, through your worship. I think just as the mayor had stated, at some point we're going to have to either decide to sign on, or the option is to create our own police force. And I think that's decision that we shouldn't take lightly at all, but we're getting a little bit more time to make our decision, but ultimately we have to decide to sign on, or we have to find alternate policing services at some point down the road.
Well, and as we all know, municipal police forces are extremely costly, and we've heard our citizens complaining about our tax increases already, and they're really going to be complaining if we opted to go with the municipal police force, because it's extremely costly, and I think we get very good value for our dollar with the RCMP. So I am going to support this agreement. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Neill. Yes,
That's Councillor Reamer's last question about the end game here was exactly the one I wanted to clarify, because if we do ultimately, if each one of us has a grievance that we don't like, it's green timbers, we don't know what that's going to cost, so we're going to say no. Somebody else says something else, somebody else says something else, we all say no. The option then is for us to start our own municipal police force, and I mean, that's not something that should be entered into lightly at all. And I don't believe that we're anywhere near even considering anything like that. So I think right now we're playing a bit of a game of political chicken, I think, that there's really no way we're going to win this thing. Yeah, we might be able to, I have in front of me an impassioned letter from Richmond Council that has been sent out asking all sorts of very tough questions. Are they prepared to back up those tough questions if they don't get the answers? Are they prepared to start their own police force? I don't think so. And I'm not either. Like Councillor Reamer, I am very concerned about the costs. I think our costs are pretty well contained in this agreement. And I do know from everything I've read and seen that the municipal force standalone would be a lot more expensive for one reason. One reason stands out, that we would not get the federal contribution that we get now towards the cost of the RCMP. So I'm going to get out of the way of the on-charging car here and not play the game of political chicken and support the recommendation.
Thank you. My own perspective is to give as much time as necessary to get the answers so that council members can satisfy themselves. It may be that some of them are still unsatisfied, but at some point, I mean, once all the questions are answered, we'll be left with a motion that has two choices. You have to pick one. You have to pick this agreement, because Alberta and various other, I mean, it's going to be this agreement, and the other choice will be a municipal police force. And you can't say, I don't want this agreement, but I don't want a municipal police force. Municipal police force is enormously expensive. You speak to some of the mayors who have municipal police forces, including one that's not far from here, and he'll say the grass may look greener on that side, but it isn't necessarily reality. That the idea that you can control your own police force, and that's why it costs a little bit more, isn't necessarily the case. In the end, last time we looked at it, it was millions of dollars more per year to run a municipal force here. The economies of scale that are given to municipalities governed by or policed by RCMP are significant in this region because we have the largest detachments. We are the only region that really uses the RCMP as our municipal police force in large communities. Those competitive advantages that the RCMP provide are, as I say, significant. When you contemplate whether it's a failed negotiation with the federal government, I think the federal government would have been happy to get out of this. I think the federal government is looking at ways of cutting its costs, and right now it subsidizes our police force. It subsidizes the RCMP in Coquitlam and Port Coquitlam and Anmore and Belcarra and communities across the province. Anyone that's governed, that's policed by the RCMP, that contract is subsidized by the federal government. So going to the federal government and negotiating improvements in the agreement, you could just as easily have come back with reductions in the agreement, with an agreement that wasn't as good for us. I think we got a lot of the things that municipalities asked the province to go out there and negotiate for, including management rights, including some improved accountability. We got those. It's not everything. This agreement isn't everything, but I think we have to make sure that every council member is satisfied that his or her questions have been answered. The E-Division building, I don't know that that's an issue for me. They do need a headquarters. The headquarters in Vancouver was past its day. And there's lots of other questions, but I think a lot of them are advantages. The integrated teams, the kinds of regionality that the RCMP provide is significant. In all of that, you have to add the fact that the Commission of Inquiry on Missing Women, one of its mandates is examining the way in which regional policing is handled, how policing is handled in this region, and whether there are improvements necessary in order to prevent that kind of tragedy from happening. Some of the improvements have already taken place, but we could well see a recommendation come out of that establishes or heads us down a different path. And so I don't know that now is the time to be contemplating that. But in the end, that is the question. The question isn't, I'm opposed to this because it's a 5-year agreement. The question is, I'm opposed to this because I want to have a municipal police force, because that's ultimately what it is. We aren't an order of government. The British North America Act, years ago, before Lose Day even, the British North America Act it didn't even recognize municipalities. It recognized provinces and a federal government. And right now, we're children of the province, and as a result, the province, I think, has done a credible job of negotiating a pretty good agreement. I'm comfortable with it, but I want to make sure every council member has their questions answered before we decide on this. So I would support a motion to defer this if a council member wants to move that. Otherwise, I will be supporting the agreement. Councillor Asmussen.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm glad to hear some of the comments at the table. I said last week when we deferred this that we only have 2 choices at that time. And I mentioned our one choice is to sign the contract or create our own police force. Those are only 2 options. This is a national contract across Canada. It's not we're in BC or we're in the Lower Mainland. We want our special conditions. This is a federal government negotiation with every province across Canada about a set of standards that they will apply to their contracts across Canada. So to turn around and say, well, I don't like the agreement with Green Timbers, or I don't like that, it isn't going to fly. It isn't going to take the province to go back and say we want to renegotiate. The other thing is that, and I'm surprised by some of the councillors that have been here for a while, that these negotiations have been going on for 4 years now. And there have been regular meetings where councils can attend a information session and on the contract, put our input into the contract and our concerns raised through that 4-year process. And a lot of people attended. Our staff members attended. Council raised issues that we thought. And so this hasn't been something that just came out of the blue. This has been in the works. Councils around the region have been involved in this for over 4 years as this moved through this negotiations on a renewal of a national policing contract with the RCMP here. We have a 24-month opt-out clause like we always have had. So if we decide at any point in time that the accountability and transparency, the affordable and cost containment, and direct reviews of cadets and all the other things, and governance doesn't pan out the way we thought it was, we as a city or we as a region then can come together under Metro Vancouver and say, you know what, this has failed. The feds haven't lived up to their agreement on this. We are now going to move towards a regional police force. We give 2 years, 24 months notice, and we're out of it. So the fact that it's a 20-year agreement doesn't bind us for 20 years. The other thing on the financial aspect of it is based on the estimated annual year-over-year costs. So these are the city's estimates of what the increases will be moving down. And our staff has done a good job at predicting the estimates, and we're fine for this year and moving forward on the costs increasing. But these costs that are increasing within the RCMP will be less than what you would have had in a municipal force. And so I'm not prepared, because we have done a study earlier on and showed that the millions of extra dollars our taxpayers would have to put out for a municipal police force. And I don't know if we'd get the agreement, because the province would have to also agree to allow us to become a municipal police force. They may want us to amalgamate with Port Moody or New Westminster. We don't have the complete free rein on that. As a region, we probably would. But at this time, this contract has been in the works for 4 years. It's come to this. We got 3 main issues that we were seeking to get of cost control, accountability, and some issues over governance. We got that. That wasn't there before in the RCMP contract. So I'm not going to defer this. I don't want to see this deferred. It's been deferred once. If I'm going to support moving this forward, accepting this, and if we don't like it in the years, we can invoke our 24-month clause and move out of it. But we're not, by pointing out a couple little things here and there, or even Richmond's memo that I briefly looked at, is not going to change the province and the federal government's contract that they've spent the 4 years. And we've had full, ample, every councillor could have attended any one of those update sessions and been involved in them. So I'm going to support moving this forward, and I hope it passes. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, I thought I knew what I was going to say, and then I listened to everybody else. Many of them said the things that I was going to say. So I'll respond to some of the things I've heard. As far as green timbers goes, yeah, we don't know what the costs are going to be, and it's all being worked on, and one day we'll know what the costs are going to be, but that's not the real question. The real question is not how much. The question is who pays. How does it get divided? I have no idea, and nobody can tell me. And I almost think I'm not really entitled to ask, we'll be told. And we'll be told is kind of the way the whole thing comes to us. We're talking about whether or not to sign an agreement. Well, an agreement implies that you've bargained. We haven't bargained. We were allowed to sit and watch while Dad and Uncle bargained. And we get to say something occasionally, and perhaps we were even listened to. I'm very happy with the police service that we get. I'm happy with the improvements that have been found through this process. But to sit here and pretend that I'm entering freely into an agreement just doesn't make any sense at all. Suggestions made that it's the feds and the province have agreed it, and this is the way it is, and there's nothing that the province can do except what they're doing. Well, the province can decide how they're sharing these costs with us. That's, I don't think, fixed in that agreement, and if it is, it doesn't make sense for it to be. The feds and the province agree on how the feds will provide policing in the province. And then it's for the province to determine, hopefully by negotiation, how those costs will be shared with the other bodies in the province, whether they're creatures of the Constitution or not. We're being asked to be parties to the agreement. We're recognized as having some standing. But we're not given the opportunity to bargain. I'm not prepared to move forward with this. At this point, there are way too many questions unanswered. And frankly, the simplest approach, and the approach that really is what's contemplated here, is for the province to legislate it. We don't have a choice. Eventually, we're going to sign off. But I want to resist as long as I can and get as many answers to as many questions as I can through the whole process. It occurred to me when I was thinking about all this is it's a little bit as though I've been courting this young lady for 2 or 3 or 4 years, I think Councillor Asmundson says. And things are getting really serious, and now we've come down to the point where I think it's worthwhile, so I say to her, so I'll tell you what, 2 weeks from Saturday we'll get married, and then we'll go on a honeymoon, and we'll have a really nice time, and then we'll come back. And sometime between now and our 3rd anniversary, I'll present you with a prenup agreement, and you'll sign it. But I'll be glad to go through it with you beforehand. So no, I don't want to move this forward. Thank you.
And I'll subsidize the agreement by 10%, yes. Councillor Hodge.
Well, that's your dad's.
Okay. I mean, to me, there's certainly a lot of unknowns here, and a lot of them have already been raised by my colleagues. And, you know, and in my previous job, I saw on a daily basis the work that our RCMP do out in the community. So I have nothing but admiration for the men and women that are out here on the street of Coquitlam working for us. But I do have concerns over the agreement, the way it's being presented. I have a concern about the review process. You know, and it's a 20-year term, and yes, we can opt out in 2 years, but the alternative is very expensive. And so, you know, and that in itself almost becomes a hammer over our head in negotiating, because it's a take this or you're going to have an expensive alternative. And I do have some concerns, particularly in the review process. Partly because I believe the agreement is going to give municipalities observer status, essentially. We won't participate if there's a review or, you know, we want to go into problem solving. We're going to be just on the outside looking in. And I think a lot of this contract, unfortunately, is we're on the outside looking in. The green timbers, for example, we don't know if we are a party to that expense. We don't know how much that expense is going to be. We don't even know that if E Division is sold, that the Heather Street property is going to be applied to the debt that's of the cost of the Green Timbers project. We don't know what teams are going to be housed in Green Timbers. We don't know who's going to, you know, what the makeup of the integrated system of teams are going to be, and who's going to be housed over there. And it's fine to say, well, yes, you know, this is a good deal because the feds subsidize us. Well, I would argue that we also subsidize them. In fact, we may be paying for part of an RCMP regional building in Surrey while we have our own RCMP building right across the courtyard here. So to me, that's subsidizing and a part of the overall RCMP presence in British Columbia. And, you know, by having officers located at detachments throughout British Columbia and paid for largely by the municipalities, it creates a force on the West Coast that they can draw on for events such as the Olympics. So I think by the nature of the fact that we pay the salaries day in and day out, that helps the RCMP from a federal level. So I don't think that this is just a one-way subsidy. I think that we are in many respects partners to policing on the West Coast of Canada. I am concerned about the wage increases. You know, the last one was I guess it's set by Treasury Board, but it was challenged in court, and this one could just as easily face a challenge. So we don't know that these are firm targets because they're technically haven't been negotiated. And yes, the alternative, people, you know, colleagues have suggested that the alternative is a municipal police force, and that's very expensive. I don't know that a municipal police force is the alternative. It might be a regional police force, because I do know that some of the same concerns that we've heard here tonight are concerns that are expressed by our neighbors. And, you know, it's not something that's going to be set up tomorrow, and it's not something that's going to occur in even 2 years. But I think that some of the concerns and some of the concerns I've heard tonight are maybe things that would down the road be addressed by a regional police force. And as I said, I'm not suggesting that we're going to a municipal force or a regional force, but I am suggesting that there are some questions that I still don't feel that I have answers for, and what I've heard from our neighbors is that they don't feel that they have answers for all of these questions yet. So, you know, I'd really like a little bit more information, and hopefully, you know, I'm not suggesting we rewrite the contract, but I am suggesting that maybe there could be some more clarification forthcoming. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. Last year at the UBCM, I know I attended at least one or maybe two sessions with Mayor Fassbender when he was discussing this whole contract, and I know how much work they put into it, and I actually know that the province, I can't remember, was it, who was the minister?
Gone fast. Deputy Minister
Shirley Bond. And I was quite impressed with both the work that the minister, Shirley Bond, had done, and Mayor Fassbender from Langley. I think they took this thing apart and tried to reconstruct it every which way, but I don't think that they're getting anywhere. And there's two things I've heard tonight. One says we'll be told, and the other one, we always have observer status. And that's what we do. We're just sitting here observing what someone's going to tell us to do. It's sort of like being a parent and telling your kid to wash the car, and they're sitting there and waiting and watching and watching and watching, and eventually they're going to have to end up washing the car because that's just what the ultimate end is going to be. The green timbers thing, is there no, so I have two questions for you, Mr. Dumont. Do we have any idea if the money from the sale of the Vancouver property will go to Surrey? Why Surrey is the second question. And is that payment for that new detachment included in all these new numbers?
Thank you. On the first part, when the existing headquarters will get closed down when Green Timbers gets opened, so that revenue will be freed up. I'm not sure that it's going to be a direct transfer to Green Timbers. With respect to Green Timbers, there are cost estimates that were provided as when they circulated the municipal police unit agreement. Those cost estimates are what was characterized to municipalities as the worst case scenario. So basically, the full cost of the new headquarters being allocated to municipalities. That's subject to, again, negotiation between the province and the federal government, and they haven't done that negotiation yet. But we do have the estimates, and they were described as being the worst case scenario, so the high end.
Well, to me, that particular building, we have to pay for our own detachments. I think the feds or the province should be responsible for the hierarchy or the regional end of it. My last question, because we are on Shaw and somebody made the comment, we're signing on for 20 years, but we can get out in 2 years. Can any municipality get out in 2 years easily, or does it have to be the whole province, or can each municipality get out in 2 years?
Thank you. These agreements are individual agreements with each municipality. There's 62 of them around the province, and it's my understanding that more than half the municipalities have already signed off on this municipal police unit agreement. But yes, individual municipalities can opt out with the 2-year provision. Now, that's not to say it wouldn't be a huge amount of work and cost for anybody to do that. That would be a big undertaking for anyone, but individual municipalities can opt out.
So then in 2 years from now, if our citizens, because I think once the citizens realize how much this is costing us, I mean, they're going to say, well, they want us to look at getting our own police force or something else, which we've already done, and we all know that it's more costly than going this way. But I think these are questions that we have to ask. So I can see there's a lot of different opinions around this board, and I don't know, I feel Councillor Hodge has some questions he wants answered, and some others. There's a few more things I'd like to ask about green timbers, because I find this quite fascinating. I would move a deferral motion, Your Worship, for 2 weeks, but 2 weeks is it? Aren't we under a timeline for this, Mr. Dumont?
Yes, they've given us till the end of May, so we have a meeting on the 14th in 1 week, or on the 28th, so we could defer this to the 28th. And
one of the other reasons, thank you for that, is we have the LMLGA coming up this week, later in the week, and I know it's going to be a hot topic. We'll be like The View up there having our hot topics, and I think perhaps all of us will come back with either our fears qualmed or not, and so I think perhaps a 2-week deferral might be a good idea rather than turn it down.
The motion is deferral. On the motion to defer, Councillor Sikora.
Thank you very much. I'm going to vote for deferral because I think we do need a lot of answers, Mayor. Number one, that I look at, years ago, we weren't even told about it, but IHET was created, right? Without any municipality knowing anything about it. And I still till today don't know whether IHET is doing a job or not. I know there's a whole bunch of different police forces in it, and I don't see that there would be such a great improvement with IHIT as if there was a police forces in these different municipalities. Secondly, I noticed they also created is this traffic deal. We have 15 officers in our community on traffic, but they're not around here because they belong to some kind of unit. You know, I noticed that there's Vancouver City Policemen issuing tickets in Coquitlam.
What?
It's a unit. It's a unit put in by the RCMP, and I think they're working out either this
not by the RCMP though.
City. Yes, it's created by a police force or RCMP. There's Vancouver Police in there. There's Port Moody Police. There's certainly the RCMP in it. It's a whole group of officers, and they'll be maybe in Surrey one day, somewhere else another day. I've seen them in Coquitlam one day, and we're missing a lot of traffic enforcements because they're not here.
Why don't we get the answer to that? Because that's separate. Each detachment has a
appreciate that, Mayor.
Each detachment has a traffic unit, but there's also the integrated road safety unit, and perhaps one of you, Inspector Clark, or Superintendent Wilcott, or Mr. Dumont, or okay.
Yes, the province has created the Integrated Road Safety Unit. It's a provincial entity, and the money is provincial. We have members that occupy those. RCMP members are in that unit, as well as municipal police forces as well, and they provide kind of a regional enforcement, but that's over and above the Coquitlam Detachment Traffic Section, which has 18 members on it and provides traffic and law enforcement to the city of Coquitlam and investigates the accidents as well at Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam.
It is award-winning, actually, isn't it?
Absolutely, it is.
And I wonder what that's costing us in each municipality.
It's paid for by the province.
Pardon?
Paid for by the province.
Paid by the province. That's shocking to me. I don't think the province would pay for anything in any municipality.
Superintendent Wilcott.
It is paid for under the provincial business lines. So it has a provincial budget. It's not from the municipal coffers. The 18 municipally funded members from Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, that is paid for through the municipalities. But URSU is over and above that, and it's provincially funded.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay. Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, on the question of deferral, is this a deferral for a couple of weeks so we can allow the individual councillors who have questions to go out and answer the questions for themselves, to ask the questions for themselves, and to be personally satisfied? Or is this motion imply that we are instructing staff to answer some questions? And if so, what exactly are those questions? So right now, I'm quite happy to support a couple of week deferral, but as long as there's more clarity in exactly what we're deferring for, because we've already had a deferral, which would have presumably given interested councillors time to look at the report and ask questions for themselves and seek answers. Are we going to just have the same process over the next 2 weeks? Where individual councillors will go out and try to find the answers for themselves, or are we specifically instructing staff to answer questions, and if so, which questions?
Well, I suspect it's a mixture of both. The staff don't have the answers to all the questions, I suspect. I suspect that, as with any council member that raises a question of staff on any subject, staff will do their best to try to find the answer if they don't already have it. So this is an opportunity, I suspect, for council members to find the answers, if necessary, to find the staff person that might help them get the answer, or to find the provincial report or whatever that gets them the answer. You know, there has been a long time. There's been 4 years of development and opportunities to have input all the way along. But if a council member wants a little bit more time to identify some specifics related to the agreement,
That's fine. If that's what they're doing, if we're not expecting staff to go out and try to figure out exactly what the questions were and how to answer them with more information that was already provided tonight.
This isn't a staff report, is it?
No. Okay. So it's a deferral, so individual councillors can go and find these answers for themselves. Good. Okay.
Councillor Reid.
Well, I make the deferral motion And if it wasn't for the fact that the LMLGA is in the next 2 days, and I will get the chance to sit, talk one-on-one or in a group with, let's say, Surrey. Maybe they have a little more information on green timbers than I have. And Richmond, why are they disliking this, that, or the other thing? I mean, at least we can sit down and get some good, rational, one-on-one discussion, and maybe they'll leave feeling better and we'll leave feeling better. If the fact that the LMLGA, that opportunity hadn't presented itself in the next 2 days, I wouldn't have moved the deferral. But I think it's a really good opportunity for all of us.
There you go. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, to give some specificity to what it is I'm looking for, I'd be very happy to see answers to the questions that were posed by Richmond Council. If I had seen them before this morning, I might have asked them of staff earlier than now, but I think they're cogent, significant questions. Some of them may well be beyond what staff is able to answer, because they flow back to the original negotiations to the province and to the feds. But they are matters that we should know and understand before offering up our agreement to something that we don't get to negotiate. Thank you.
Councillor Reid?
No.
Oh, okay. No, but your microphone got pushed again.
Well, on that last issue...
Councillor O'Neill on the third time around on a motion to defer.
Thank you. On that last issue, I'm still confused because the City of Richmond is asking its questions of the Minister of Justice, not of its staff. And now you're saying that you want staff to answer the Richmond's questions that were directed to the Minister of Justice. To me, that doesn't add up, and I don't think we can expect... I know we have an excellent staff, but I don't think we can expect them to answer in 2 weeks questions that Richmond directed to the Minister of Justice in Ottawa. That doesn't make sense to me. So I appreciate Councillor Reid's explanation of the deferral, and on that ground I will support it, but I certainly don't expect our staff to do the Minister of Justice's job in Ottawa. Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to support the motion to defer, as I said. Some of what we're hearing out there is partisan. No, really. And there are councils that are using this as an opportunity to bash the negotiator. And I suspect the province probably even regrets being party to this negotiation because it didn't get anything out of it. It wasn't for the province. It was for each of us 62 or 68 RCMP policed communities. Nonetheless, anyone that thinks a police board in a municipal police force is a better solution or that you have more control, you get no control whatsoever on a police board. One might argue you get no control over an RCMP detachment, but I think we have a very good relationship locally, and I think that I'm satisfied with the answers I've gotten out of these, but if some others require some answers...
It's the same as we have now then, no control.
So if some of the... I didn't interrupt when you spoke, but anyway. So if we want to take some more time, I suspect that these council members that want more time are genuine in their attempt to find answers. Some of the answers, though, will be no. This is the agreement as the federal government finally laid it out. This is the agreement, and we can sign on. The question will be municipal police force or this agreement, and I suspect council will make the decision, as it has in the past, that for at least the time being, for at least the next 24 months, will be policed by the RCMP. So the motion is to defer. All in favor? All opposed? No one's opposed to that, so we're going to come back and talk about it again. Please, no cheering from the media. Mr. Clerk.
Item 11 is the Sideway Cafe use policy and permitting system. The two-part recommendation is that Council approve the policy attached to the report of the Manager of Legal and Bylaw Enforcement, and to give first, second, and third readings to fees and charges bylaw amending bylaw Sidewalk Cafe permits 4313.
But I want to know where the Sideway Cafe is.
Okay, the clerk got it one wrong. Moved by Councillor Rasmussen, seconded by Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Sikora on Sideways
Thank you very much. I believe we're moving in the right direction as far as finally being able to have, some tables and chairs on the sidewalk of a restaurant that may be, in like a Spirit Square and that type of deal, and other places. Pardon me, but I think that we're going a little too far. What is happening that now I see there's going to be taxation on it, a certain amount of money paid. If there's 3 tables and 6 chairs, it's $125 per year. 6 tables and 12 chairs, $250 per year. 9 tables and 18 chairs, $375 a year. Now, this is a very short-lived kind of deal. They're not going to be out there whole year round. They might be there for a couple of months, July and August probably. And even those months, if it's raining, they're not going to have any. So it's and they're paying enough taxes in the city. I mean, really, seriously, the businesses are taxed to that, and we all know it, and we all sympathize. But however, everything that we do in this city, instead of helping our businesses along to make them survive, or work with them to see what can the city do to make it possible for them to enhance their business, we seem to want to have another charge, another charge, another charge. It just seems like one form of taxation to another form of taxation to some other form of taxation. It certainly doesn't take no bylaws to enforce this. It certainly doesn't take anything more than, and I'm sure that you'll also in this bylaw they'll probably come forward is also have a fact is that, the chairs, the tables have got to be certain size and the umbrellas have to be certain size. Because we've already had one problem this summer with one business. So to me, Mayor, I cannot support it. I can support them by putting tables and chairs out there and leave them alone. Let them police themselves. You go to Kelowna, and I've mentioned this before, Kelowna even has taken some parking spaces away, and the sidewalk is as it is, but they bring out build a stage, kind of stage, and the chairs and that type of thing where the parking meters are. And that's where the people sit. Is there fees? No, there's no fees. It's free. They help the businesses survive. So, we need to help businesses survive in this community. I know that you're going to say that Kelowna charges, but they don't. Because I made a few phone calls, and there's other municipality cities also that have the same thing. You go across Alberta, they have the same thing. And a lot of those businesses are, I can't think for 1 minute. We charge a business license, we charge property tax, we charge a whole lot of other things, and then, my God, I want to put up a table and chair or a couple of tables and chairs. Oh, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to pay a fee. I think it's going way too far, absolutely way too far. You're killing businesses, not helping them. And how can a business come into this city if that's what exactly is happening? For everything they're going to do, they're going to have to pay. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, just a clarification. I did look up Kelowna before because I've seen them in the mission area of Kelowna, and they're quite neat stage areas where they take over decommissioned. They call them decommissioned parking spaces, and the fee is $8 a meter per month to rent the space.
So it would be $96
per meter.
$8 per square meter.
$96 to be for how many seats, Mayor?
Councillor Segura, I didn't interrupt when you were speaking. It would be $8 per square meter per month area utilized by the permit holder, which would be about, by my calculations, was about 4 times the permit fee that we charge. Our permit fee is about 5 cents per chair per day, and quite frankly, we've had a successful one in Coquitlam. It's called Cornerstone. We have allowed it to have tables and chairs, and it actually doesn't have them just for the 2 months. It has them year-round. And they're allowed to have them because the city is able to lease the property in front, because the city owns the property in front, fee simple. It's City Hall. And they have their chairs and tables out all year round, as does the Starbucks, as do lots of places that have private property and therefore sidewalk, not public sidewalk, but private sidewalk used for this. So this is a year-round operation, and if you go year-round at the fees that we're contemplating, the $375 for the 9 tables, 18 chairs works out to 5 cents a day per chair. And if you can't make the 5 cents off that extra chair, I don't think it's going to help much. I think this is a great help for the businesses, and it's what they've been asking for. So I'm glad that staff have found a way to recover the costs of the program, and that cost is so much less than some other communities. I think we're doing a great service for local business, and we're also doing a great service for the walkable downtown core that we've been trying to build here, the pedestrian-friendly and really vibrant city centre with cafes. I can picture the day when you'll be able to sit down and have a glass of wine on one of these. No, I can't picture that day, but wouldn't it be neat if we could get to the point where we'd actually be able to be that kind of open-minded? But in the interim, I think having access to 18 chairs on 9 tables on a patio is a good first baby step. Moving to Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, thank you. I think this is, unlike what one of my colleagues has suggested, that I think this is a very pro-business, a very favorable to business, very business-enhancing bylaw. That before now, businesses could not do this and could not legally set up chairs and tables on city-owned sidewalks. And now we are allowing them to do that. So rather than standing in the way of business, rather than putting up barriers to business, we are opening up the city to more business, and by so doing, enhancing all of our street life. I mean, we've seen some exciting things today with the development down in Fraser Mills. And this is another one of the exciting things that will add to Coquitlam's livability, improve the business climate, and as the mayor just suggested, the modest fees that we are charging just go to cover the processing expenses, barely, as far as I understand. We're not trying to make any money out of this. We are trying to put together a system that will enhance business in Coquitlam. So I know that the councillors who have concerns about this are quite often entrenched in their opinions, but I would suggest to those colleagues that they rethink this, that they see this as a business-enhancing bylaw, and this would be a wonderful message to everybody in Coquitlam if this were a unanimous approval moving forward.
Are there any motions for an alleluia after that? Okay. Both sides of the passion on this issue. I think everyone wants to move business forward, and I'm appreciative of that. The motion. Actually, I forgot the motion. Staff recommendation. It has been moved and seconded.
Has been moved and seconded.
The staff recommendation. All in favor. All opposed. Councillor Sikora doesn't want to do that. Yeah.
Sorry, Councillor O'Neill. I'm sorry to spoil your evening. I think it's another taxation.
Okay. We have a notice of motion.
If this was answered, we'd have a way of recording that noise, but our minutes don't allow other.
Yes. Some members guffawed. The motion passed almost unanimously. Almost unanimously. And I'm going to, even though she hasn't pushed her button, I'm going to recognize Councillor Reid.
We have one more item.
Oh, we have one more item. You're right.
Next item, item 12, is the Metro Vancouver Board and Brief. Our representatives are available to respond to questions, but the recommendation is that Council receive the brief for information.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, second by Councillor O'Neill. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Councillor, you want to push your button, Reid? There you go.
You want to push your button, Reid is ready. That the City of Coquitlam implement a ban on the possession, trade, sale, and distribution of shark fins or their derivative products, and that staff provide a report on how to proceed with such an initiative, especially focusing on the issue of compliance. And I so move, and councillors...
I'm going to ask, please...
Cora seconded it.
That's fine. A notice of motion that actually effectively bans it doesn't do that. So I would ask only that...
I said to implement a ban.
Okay, there we go. Okay, good. So that's been moved and seconded, and that will be considered at the next council meeting.
Thank you. And I have background for Councillor O'Neill.
Hallelujah. Moved by Councillor Asmussen, second by Councillor Nicholson to adjourn. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. We'll now, as is our practice, we will open the floor to questions on tonight's agenda. Are there any questions on tonight's agenda from the audience members? Any questions at all? Any questions at all? Any questions, please? Seeing none. Happy birthday, Jessica. All the best to everybody. Thanks for coming.